Call of Duty League, not the greatest of headlines for them or for YouTube, frankly. It's kind of a surprising headline here. And the headline was CDL announces broadcast information and YouTube is conspicuously missing. So they posted essentially where you could watch the CDL matches that start, like for the new season, and they listed Twitch and they listed the Call of Duty website, but YouTube was completely missing. And the tweet said, "The season starts tomorrow. Here's where to watch." Again, with no YouTube in sight. Now, bit of background for anyone who didn't catch this when we talked about it originally. The league had signed a deal with YouTube for $160 million where it was broadcast exclusively on YouTube. It was really the biggest media rights deal that at the time, and still probably to this day, in esports. But clearly YouTube didn't want to renew, or clearly CDL didn't want to renew at whatever YouTube was offering, if they offered anything. But this relationship has fallen apart to the point where it's actually not even being broadcast on YouTube. So it's Twitch exclusive, essentially. Curious what you guys think of this. Jimmy, any thoughts on this, or Jeff?
Maybe this is just the the social media intern made a horrible mistake and forgot to put
I doubt it.
Our partner. I mean, that would be kind of funny. But because YouTube is so irrelevant, they just forgot them. No, I don't know. I mean, I had heard somewhere, and maybe we have the stats to back this up, or maybe we don't, but that the opening weekend of Call of Duty had done really well on New Home. Is that possible?
It's possible. I don't think I
incomplete information, but
I don't think I saw that story. I mean, maybe one of you guys can look it up quickly, or Jimmy can look it up.
Yeah,
I'll
take a look and see if I can find it.
I mean, that would be interesting, though, Jeff. Right?
I guess because my point was that would show that this was like, because you said this could be bad for both Activision and YouTube, and I think your assumption is that this probably means that maybe YouTube didn't want to renew the contract, which may or may not be the case. It probably was a bit of an overspend. But I kind of took it to say this is probably worse for YouTube. Granted, in the grand scheme of things, YouTube is fine. So it's irrelevant for YouTube because it's such a big company as part of Google. But I think this hurts YouTube a bit more than it hurt, or their reputation more than it hurts Activision, if the Call of Duty League went on to Twitch and did significantly better than it was doing on YouTube, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of all the potential scenarios here, right? It's either the viewership wasn't good on YouTube, which it wasn't, right? And YouTube didn't want to renew, and that could mean they didn't want it at all. It could mean they wanted to pay some number that Activision didn't want to take. So that's one possibility, right? That the viewership wasn't good, and therefore YouTube wanted to pay some number less than what Activision was willing to take. How low that number is, if it was zero, I don't know. The other scenario is Activision Blizzard wanted to get away from YouTube, right? That they believed for some reason YouTube was hurting their league. That look, I want to believe that because I think very little of YouTube gaming and what they've done over the last few years there. But that seems a little hard to believe, right? Like you have to feel really good about the platform you're going to if you're giving up $160 million of media rights. I don't know. Jimmy?
It's complicated. I lean more with, I think, your starting theory, which was YouTube probably offered a low amount. Because again, to not even include the YouTube link, it only hurts Activision to not have as many viewers everywhere, right? That's the new streaming model, whether you're in gaming or music or video or any kind of media, you want as wide of an audience as possible. Some platforms do believe in exclusivity. I think the broader case of just lowering the paywall or the entry, that barrier to entry is becoming more successful for brands to increase their audience, their viewership, and then monetize that way. So the fact that they were blatantly left off of this list is really, I think, more of a comment on the sour relationship between the two, because otherwise, to your point, Activision would want to include them just to get more viewers here and there. So I think YouTube offered probably a low amount that Activision turned down. I think I think honestly, we're seeing the fallout of a lot of the short-term greed and structure under the Kodak regime that were boosting, I think, that company or bolstering that company's position and standing, for their shareholders at that time, that are now kind of like we knew all along were not for the long-term best interests of the company, right? Taking an absurd contract as opposed to growing this audience organically across multiple channels and something that wasn't going to renew. Um, it's kind of sad to see, honestly. I think the Call of Duty brand is big enough to stand on its own, and I'm sure they'll get great viewership on Twitch, and I'm sure they probably will have YouTube distribution that's just not being advertised here. But I think the Activision team has a hole to dig out of, and I don't see anyone rush. The teams are going to want payment right off of this viewership. They're going to want a TV rights deal the same way they were expecting all these big sponsorship deals that fell through about a year and a half ago, when all those public filings were the talk of the town. So I don't know. It feels like a loss for the gaming industry at large to not have a relationship on you. As much as we criticize YouTube, you can't discount or knock the viewership and the audience that's on that platform. And as big as Call of Duty is, you would expect them to at least have some presence there. But this is not an oversight, and this is it's just not good for viewership in general.
To be clear, I'm sure they have some presence there. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Like I haven't checked. It's probably easy for me to just pull up a tab right now and check. But like my guess is all of the VODs are up on YouTube. I think it's been a rejection of YouTube's live streaming business more than anything else that has not lived up to expectations. Lindsay, I don't know if you had thoughts.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is we've been in this period, it feels like of stagnation where everything VOD is on YouTube and everything live is on Twitch. And every time I sort of think that there's going to be a shakeup in that structure, there's just not. And this is yet another sign of that. So I don't necessarily know if this affects people who watch it that much. But I just don't think we could keep continuing on the same route for the next 10 years and everyone would probably be happy. But this kind of stagnation doesn't necessarily lead to great like innovation or great new activations for fans or great new fan experiences. And that's the part that kind of makes me sad is I feel like each player is getting more entrenched in what they're good at and not really making serious moves to improve on other things.
It's true, right? You would think that competition from YouTube Live would have created more innovation in the space, but it just wasn't a competitive enough product. I just want to catch up here. Chris says 192,000 peak, which is decent, like really good, quite good for Call of Duty, considering what they were doing on YouTube before. Also added, week 1 of CDL 2023 had the 4th highest viewership in the Call of Duty League era. That's interesting also. I mean, again, I don't know. Is it the failure of YouTube? Is it the success of Twitch? Is it right? It's hard to pin down causality here, right? Like, what is the reason this is better? The question is now Call of Duty League is without $160 million of revenue from YouTube. Where do you make up that hole? And what happens to the teams who, were promised this kind of payday and revenue split? That's a big hole to fill. $160 million. And it was over 3 years. So, call it $55 million a year or whatever. But that's still a big hole to fill. I don't know how you generate $55 million a year to make up for the lost YouTube revenue. Chris says YouTube doesn't do a good job. Christian says YouTube doesn't do a good job at promoting CDL or Overwatch League. Now that I think of it, same thing with their big money streamers. True. I think I'm curious if you guys think that's true.
That was one of the doc's criticisms, wasn't it? That YouTube wasn't even promoting his own stream or tagging him in things that he was a part of, that they did nothing to support the creators that they had these big contracts with. So I think that's a good point by Christian.
Also, hi guys. Matt says, agree with you, Paul. Even though YouTube gaming is one of the worst streaming platforms, it still has a huge reach. Seems like Activision is cutting off its nose to spite its face. I think they just believe that the VOD stuff is better. And if YouTube's not going to pay what they want, they'd rather sort of cut YouTube off altogether on the live side. I don't know. Again, I'm trying to put myself in that boardroom